Welcome to our deep dive into how private equity firms are influencing the food industry, often at the expense of our health and safety. Now, I know what you're thinking. Private equity, isn't that just a bunch of guys in suits moving numbers around on a spreadsheet? And yes, while that is a significant part of it, the reality is far more insidious and, frankly, a lot more disgusting than you might imagine. We're talking about the food you eat every day, the stuff that fuels your body. And the unsettling truth is that many of the decisions about what goes into it aren't being made by people who prioritize your well-being. They're being made by private equity firms laser-focused on one thing: maximizing profits. Over the next few minutes, we're going to peel back the layers of the food industry to expose how these firms operate, the tactics they employ, and the very real consequences for our health, our environment, and our future. Buckle up, folks, because things are about to get pretty grim.
So, how do private equity firms turn a profit in the food industry? Well, it's not exactly rocket surgery. They swoop in, acquire a company, and then squeeze every last drop of profit out of it like they're trying to make orange juice from a rock. And one of their favorite ways to do that is through the fine art of cost cutting. Now, some cost-cutting measures are fairly innocuous. Maybe they'll renegotiate contracts with suppliers or find ways to streamline production. But when it comes to the food industry, those cuts often come at the expense of quality and safety. We're talking about replacing natural ingredients with cheaper synthetic alternatives, pumping food full of preservatives to extend its shelf life, and generally prioritizing profit over the well-being of the consumer. Think about it. That seemingly irresistible buy one, get one free deal on chicken nuggets? It's not a sign of corporate generosity. It's a calculated move to mask the fact that those nuggets are probably made with lower-grade meat and a cocktail of unpronounceable chemicals. And here's the kicker. These cost-cutting measures don't just impact the taste and quality of our food, they directly affect our health.
Let's be honest, folks, private equity firms and processed food companies are a match made in, well, not heaven, more like a dimly lit back alley behind a dumpster fire. They're obsessed with efficiency, profit maximization, and squeezing every last cent out of everything. Private equity firms love processed food companies because they're predictable, scalable, and highly profitable. These companies turn cheap, unhealthy ingredients into shelf-stable products with long ingredient lists. From a private equity perspective, these products are designed to be addictive. They're engineered to hit all the right pleasure centers in our brains, leaving us craving more. But this love affair with processed food comes at a steep price. Overconsumption of processed foods is linked to health problems like obesity, heart disease, and type 2 diabetes. Yet, private equity firms continue to invest heavily in the processed food industry. They profit handsomely while we're left to deal with the consequences. It's a classic case of corporate greed trumping public health.
Remember playing Monopoly as a kid? Remember that feeling of dread as one player started buying up all the properties, slowly but surely squeezing everyone else out of the game? Well, that's basically what's happening in the food industry. Only instead of Boardwalk and Park Place, it's your local grocery store and the future of our food system. Private equity firms, with their bottomless pockets and insatiable appetite for profit, have been steadily consolidating their control over the food industry, gobbling up companies like a hungry hippo in a game of hungry, hungry hippos, only instead of marbles, it's our access to affordable, healthy food. They're creating massive conglomerates that control everything from the seeds we plant to the food on our plates, leaving farmers, suppliers, and consumers at their mercy. And as with any monopoly, this concentration of power has some pretty dire consequences. For starters, it stifles competition. When a handful of companies control the majority of the market, they can dictate prices, often at the expense of both consumers and suppliers. Farmers are forced to accept lower prices for their crops, while consumers are left with fewer choices and higher prices at the checkout counter. But it's not just about money, folks. This consolidation also threatens the diversity of our food supply. As these megacorporations prioritize efficiency and profit, they often favor monoculture farming practices and genetically modified crops, reducing the variety of foods available to us and making our food system more vulnerable to pests, diseases, and climate change. And let's not forget about the impact on innovation. When a few large companies control the market, there's less incentive for new, smaller companies to emerge with healthier, more sustainable alternatives.
Now, you might be thinking, surely there are regulations in place to prevent these private equity firms from running roughshod over our food system and our health? And you'd be right, there are. On paper, at least. But regulations are only as good as the people enforcing them. When those people are lobbied by industries with a vested interest in keeping regulations lax, it's like putting a fox in charge of the henhouse. Private equity firms spend a fortune lobbying to weaken regulations and delay stricter standards. They employ former government officials to influence lawmakers and make campaign contributions. And it works. Regulations designed to protect public health are often watered down or dismantled due to industry pressure. Take, for example, food additives. Many additives linked to health problems remain legal due to industry lobbying. Consumers have a right to know what's in their food, but mandatory GMO labeling remains elusive due to biotech industry lobbying. It's a classic case of money talking and public health walking the plank.
Now let's talk about agribusiness, that delightful intersection of industrial efficiency and environmental calamity. It's the backbone of our food system, responsible for producing the vast majority of the food we eat. It's also, thanks in no small part to the influence of private equity firms, a major contributor to climate change, deforestation, and the depletion of our natural resources. See, private equity firms love agribusiness. It's a massive industry with huge growth potential, especially as the global population continues to climb. And they've been pouring money into it, snapping up farmland, investing in agricultural technology, and generally transforming the way food is produced. But this transformation hasn't exactly been a picnic for the planet. In their relentless pursuit of efficiency and profit, private equity firms have encouraged the adoption of industrial farming practices that are wreaking havoc on our environment. We're talking about massive monoculture farms that rely heavily on chemical fertilizers and pesticides, polluting our waterways, depleting our soil, and decimating biodiversity. We're talking about factory farms that confine animals in cramped, unsanitary conditions, generating mountains of waste and contributing to the spread of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And let's not forget about deforestation. As demand for agricultural land increases, forests are being cleared at an alarming rate to make way for more crops and livestock, releasing massive amounts of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere and further exacerbating climate change. It's a vicious cycle, folks. Private equity firms, driven by profit, encourage unsustainable agricultural practices that degrade the environment, which in turn makes it harder to produce food in the long run.
We've talked about the environmental and health impacts of private equity in the food industry, but there's another aspect: the human cost. Behind every cheap burger and discounted bag of chips, there are real people working in exploitative and dangerous conditions. Private equity firms focus on efficiency and profit, viewing workers as costs to be minimized. In the food industry, this can have devastating consequences for those who plant, harvest, process, and package our food. Many farm workers, often migrants or undocumented, work long hours in grueling conditions for poverty wages. Slaughterhouse workers endure dangerous and traumatizing jobs, at high risk of injury and psychological distress. Processing plant workers face repetitive motions and hazardous chemicals, all for cheap processed food. These workers are the backbone of our food system, yet they're often treated as disposable cogs. They're denied fair wages, safe working conditions, and basic human dignity.
Thank you for watching. It's crucial to be aware of how private equity influences the food we eat and the potential risks involved. From prioritizing profit over health and safety to lobbying against stricter regulations and exploiting workers. The picture isn't pretty. But here's the good news. We're not powerless in this situation. Every time we shop for groceries, we cast a vote for the kind of food system we want to support by making informed choices, opting for healthier, more sustainable options, and supporting companies with ethical practices. We can drive real change. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember, the power to create a fairer, healthier, and more sustainable food system ultimately lies in our hands, or rather on our plates.